Can a team like Ferrari, with all its history and resources, resign before the end of the season? How bad they have to go to cancel their developments and give up fighting? Today I will tell you everything. Why Ferrari arrives defeated at the Azerbaijan GP 2025. The arrival at the Azerbaijan GP is, therefore, an opportunity to overcome. It is another point on a journey already resigned. Ferrari runs with a car that no longer evolves, with pilots fighting to maintain motivation and with an address that has decided to turn the page before the current story ends. Azerbaijan will be another race in which the goal will not be to win, but to survive, collect data, avoid errors and think once again in what comes next. To understand why Ferrari is at the breakdown in 2025, we must mercilere to the great guilty technical of this debacle, the SF25. From his first laps on the track, even before starting the championship in Melbourne, the car already had serious symptoms. Problems that, far from being small adjustments or imperfections of youth, ended up being structural. The car is not broken by bad evolution, it is wrong from its conceptual base. One of the main SF25 failures has to do with something as fundamental as the march height. The car cannot operate in the optimal high range required by its soil to generate effective aerodynamic load. This is critical because in Formula 1 modern, where the ground is the main generator of downforce thanks to the soil effect, losing efficiency in this area is like competing with a hand tied behind the back. Ferrari has tried to mitigate this with suspension changes, with adjustments in the stiffness of the chassis, even with motor maps adapted to compensate for curve losses. But nothing has worked. The base is poorly designed and everything else becomes irrelevant. The direct consequence of this structural failure is a car that becomes unpredictable. In medium curves, where a precise balance is needed between aerodynamic and traction load, the SF25 becomes an enemy for its own pilots. The subvira car at the most delicate time of the turn, that is, just when the pilot needs to trust the front axle response. Leclerc has openly said it on more than one occasion. He lacks aerodynamic load. But that phrase contains much more than it seems. It is not just about having less load than a McLaren or a Red Bull. The real problem is in the distribution and consistency of that load. In the SF25, it only exists in an extremely narrow window, which makes it useless in variable track conditions, extreme temperatures or with tire wear. And in 2025, these conditions are the norm, not the exception. The other great car failure is in its rear suspension, especially in how it transmits the forces to the ground. The SF25 suspension set is excessively rigid, which prevents the car from adapting to the pianos and the irregularities of the layout. In theory, this should help keep stability at high speeds. In practice, it has made the car uncomfortable and difficult to predict. The consequences were visible from the first races, but the turning point was in the China GP, when Hamilton was disqualified by excessive wear of the flat background. Why did this happen? Because the car touched the ground constantly and not because of a piloting or tuning error, but for a problem in its architecture. Ferrari tried, during the first races, to correct these defects with patches. There was talk of a complete modification of the soil, of changes in the rake of the car, even of a reconfiguration of the front aerodynamic flow. But the drop that filled the glass was the cancellation of the update package planned for Azerbaijan. This package had been developed in Maranello for weeks, all the validations in the wind tunnel had passed, and it was supposed to be the technical impulse they needed. However, before reaching track, it was completely discarded. The reason? The team concluded that investing in this concept no longer made sense. From that moment on, the development of SF25 froze. The car is technically dead even if it still runs. And this is where the technical one connects with the emotional. The pilots no longer trust the car. And that, in Formula 1, is the beginning of the end. A pilot can have talent, it can be aggressive, it can even overcome a rhythm deficit. But he can't fight when the car does not respond. Charles Leclerc, who has taken mediocre monoplays to the limit so many times, this year has spent more time explaining what does not work than celebrating what is. And Lewis Hamilton, who came with the illusion of closing his career in red, has had to face a machine that has left him more frustrated than any Mercy of his worst years. The internal sensation is to have designed a car with sand foundations. The data does not lie. The simulations show a constant loss of efficiency in urban paths, high degradation in mixed conditions, and a lack of traction in curve outputs that makes it vulnerable even in front of midfield equipment. In Azerbaijan, a circuit that combines very long straight with technical curves, all these weaknesses are amplified. The SF25 is not simply a slow car. It is a car that cannot be improved. The failure of the SF25 has not only forced Ferrari to surrender in the 2025 season, but has also completely redefined his horizon. With the present already committed and the rivals getting more and more advantage, in Maranello they have chosen to apply a cold, but pragmatic principle. Cut losses, restructure the focus and anticipate the next big change. This is how Project 678 was born, the internal name of the car that Ferrari is developing for the 2026 season, framed by a large-scale regulatory change. This project is not a simple evolution. It is a total restart. The new technical regulations that enter into force in 2026 proposes a more efficient Formula One, lighter and with a different relationship between passive and active aerodynamics. A significant reduction of the soil effect and a new architecture for power units is expected, with a greater emphasis on MGUK and sustainable fuels. This change not only requires technical adaptations, it demands a new philosophy. And Ferrari has decided to start building it in more than a year in advance. The Project 678 is conceived as more than a car. It is a complete redesign of how Ferrari conceives Formula One. The reports indicate that the chassis will be developed with a radically different approach in terms of torsional stiffness and distribution of weights. The lessons learned with the SF25 have been painful but useful. For example, the uncontrolled flexion points will be eliminated in the soil area and the rear suspension will be completely redesigned to allow a broader operation range in terms of march height. In other words, a car is being created that does not depend on working in a perfect window, but is adaptable, stable and resistant to the change in conditions. One of the most ambitious points of Project 678 is the complete redesign of the internal cooling system. Ferrari suffered throughout 2025 with thermal instabilities in the race, especially in urban paths. The new design promises a more compact internal architecture, which reduces the resistance to progress and releases space to optimize aerodynamic packaging. To this is added a deep change in aerodynamic load philosophy. More stable, less peaks, and with a more balanced distribution between front and rear axle. A car that is not the best only in classification is sought, but shines in a rhythm of career and tire management. Something that Ferrari has not achieved consisting in almost a decade. Another point to keep in mind is that Ferrari is preparing the land so that the Project 678 is the car around which the last stage of Lewis Hamilton's career is built. The team has made available to the British a significant influence on development. He is consulted on issues that in Mercedes were not even discussed with him, such as the distribution of the center of gravity, the response of the rear train and the address system. Hamilton, meanwhile, knows that this is the car with which he has to win. There is no more margin. This is all or nothing. If Ferrari manages to deliver a competitive car for 2026, he will have a last great opportunity to go for that 8th title. If not, its signing will go down in history as another strategic error of the red team. Ferrari's great challenge is not to build a fast car. It is building a car that is always fast. That does not depend on the weather, the track, a good classification or a perfect strategy. What McLaren has achieved in 2024 and 2025 has not been magic, it has been consistency. And Ferrari knows it. Therefore, Project 678 is not being designed to be spectacular in a test. It is being designed to survive and perform in all possible scenarios. That is the true revolution that Maranello needs. Ferrari is not suffering because he misses pilots. He is one of the most talented duos on the grill. Nor does it suffer due to lack of budget. It is still one of the teams with the greatest investment and institutional support. The real problem is in the convergence of poorly executed decisions, inefficient internal processes and a mentality that remains attached to the glory of the past, without fully adapt to Formula One of the present. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix does not represent a hope of redemption. There are no updates that change fate. There are no tactical surprises that can make up what is already evident. Ferrari runs with a car that has been abandoned by its own creator. A car that is no longer in development, which no longer improves, that simply exists to meet the calendar. Every kilometer on track is a countdown. A clock that does not mark time towards the championship, but towards the end of a cycle that has failed. Project 678 can be the answer. Can be the car that changes everything. But the real challenge is not technical, it is cultural. Ferrari has to change his way of thinking. You must stop seeing Formula One as a war of names and start seeing it as a battle of processes, modern engineering, digital strategy, constant adaptation. It is not enough to sign champions. You have to build champions. And that begins from the first render at the factory, not from the first podium in March. What is at stake is not only the 2025 season. It is the credibility of a project, the legacy of a brand, and the last great opportunity of one of the best pilots in history. Lewis Hamilton did not come to Ferrari to fight for minor points. Wine to write history. But for that to happen, Ferrari needs more than talent. You need vision, coherence, execution. And above all, you need to stop looking back and start building once and for all forward. Now the question, do you think Ferrari is doing the right thing to throw in the towel in 2025 and concentrate on the 2026 car? Or is it another chapter in a long history of unfulfilled promises? Leave it to the comments, I want to know your opinion.